Hi folks, Vince again with the Tinkerer's Workshop. When I first got interested in machining and metalworking, I bought an old 10-inch Atlas lathe off of Craigslist, and it was pretty dirty. It had been sitting in a barn for several years, but I cleaned it up and got it oiled and running again, and I actually kind of learned how to make chips, cut my teeth on that lathe, and I used it for a few years. And then about 5 years ago, I came across a really nice 9-inch South Bend lathe, and I ended up buying that and selling the Atlas. And even though I think the South Bend is a better built lathe overall, I kind of always regretted selling that Atlas just because I don't know, there's something about the styling of those old Atlas lathes I think is really cool. The lines on them are really sort of Art Deco looking, and I really like the look of it. So a couple weeks ago, just by chance, I came across another older Atlas lathe that was for sale. The owner was an elderly gentleman who had had a stroke and had to go into a nursing home. And he didn't have any children, but his heirs ended up just selling everything out of his house, and they actually had the house up for sale, and it was closing escrow in a few days, and they just needed this lathe out. So I ended up buying it. I had to take it apart to get it out of his basement and move down into my basement, but I've got it down here now, so I thought we'd go ahead and take a look at it. Well, here she is. This is an Atlas 10F lathe. The 10 just designates that it can swing a piece of work 10 inches in diameter over the ways. And the F is just a letter that was used to designate that series. There was a 10A, B, C, D, and E before this 10F. And the 10F was introduced around 1938, and it ran until I think 1957 or 1959, somewhere around there. So almost nearly 20 years that they made this particular series of lathes. They made hundreds of thousands of them, so they're fairly common, and the design didn't really change much over the years. This is a very early one, though. I'm guessing it's probably from 1938 or 39. And the way you can tell that one clue here is this on-off switch. It's got an oval switch plate to it, and shortly after they came out with this lathe, they went to a rectangular switch plate. I'm guessing probably around 1940 or 41. Certainly by then it had changed. So this is probably from 1938-39. This lathe has an overall bed length of 36 inches, which allows you to swing a piece of work 24 inches in length between centers. Atlas made 4 different bed lengths, and this is the shortest of the 4. They made 36, 42, 48, and 54 originally. Later they cut that down just to two sizes. So this is the smallest, which I'm kind of glad that it is short, because that means I can fit it in my basement a little easier, since it is just a second lathe for me now. This does not have the quick change gearbox. It has manual change gears that you change on the side here. And this is the reversing lever to change the feed direction, left or right. So that's all working, which is good. The lathe did come on the original Atlas cast iron stand. The legs here are cast iron with wood boards underneath. And the wood's actually in really good condition, partly because on the top board, the owner had placed some galvanized metal underneath to catch any oil and chips that would fall on there. So when you lift those up, the wood looks brand new underneath, it's kind of nice to see someone take care of their equipment like that. Looking at the headstock here, this particular lathe is equipped with babbitt bearings. Atlas made 2 versions of headstocks. One had babbitt bearings like this, and the other had Timken tapered roller bearings. Kind of wish this had Timken bearings, but it is what it is. The babbitt bearings, you can tell the lathes that have babbitt bearings because they'll have these caps at either end of the spindle, and you'll see these cap screws holding those caps on. And those caps can be removed. There are shims in between the cap and the body of the headstock, so that as the babbitt material wears, you can take the cap off and remove one layer of the shim, and then on either end, and then tighten these back down, and that kind of takes up any play that results from wear over the years. The babbitt bearing lathes actually run very true. The only issue with them is you can't run them at high speeds, and you have to make sure you oil them every time you use it. Because if they're not oiled, then the babbitt can get scored and damaged, and it's not easy to re-pour babbitt bearings, which is why the Timken bearing lathes in some ways are better, because you can swap out the bearings if you need to. One thing I noticed when I first bought the lathe is I looked under the caps of these oilers here, and the felt wicking that was in there was damp from oil. So that was a good sign that whoever used this lathe took good care of it and kept it well oiled. Underneath the headstock cover here, the bowl gear was in great shape, no missing teeth. Same on the other gear on the other end of the spindle here. Pulley was in good shape. Back gears, same story there, nothing worn or broken on that. One thing I did notice is that when you go to engage the back gears, to do that you have to pull out a pin here on the bowl gear, and then you flip this lever just to get the back gears to mesh with the bowl gear. And there's supposed to be a spring washer in here that keeps some tension on this lever, and that's either missing or just not adjusted right. So once you actually start to run the lathe in back gear mode, it just kicks out on its own. So that's going to need a little bit of work, but it shouldn't take much to get that working again. The spindle on these Atlas lathes is a 1.5 inch by 8 threads per inch thread pitch. Threads are in good shape. There was actually a 4-jaw chuck on the lathe when I bought it, and it was stuck on there pretty good, which probably was a good thing, because it kept anybody from damaging these threads, and it also kept that chuck from walking away. I imagine there was probably a lot of tooling that was with this lathe, but the basement that it was sitting in had been cleaned out completely. Somebody had gone through the house and just taken everything out and sold whatever they could. So any tooling or anything was probably long gone. The chuck was stuck on there, so nobody could take that off. And there were a few things that were kept with the lathe. Somebody had the foresight to set them aside, or else they just were overlooked. And I did get those. I'll show you those towards the end of the video here. But anyways, the spindle is in good shape. Morse 3 taper in here. It's not all scored up, so that's good. Everything looked good with the headstock there. So let's kind of take a look at some of the other parts here. One potential area of trouble on these Atlas lathes is this reversing gearbox here, and this is used to change the feed direction. It changes the direction of the rotation of the lead screw. And these boxes are made out of a cast aluminum and zinc material called Zamic. The actual box is made out of that, and then the gears inside, there are a couple of bevel gears inside here that switch the direction of the lead screw. Those are also made out of Zamic. And if you're not careful with these, if you force it, you can break those gears or the actual box itself pretty easily. So fortunately, I tested this one and it works great. It shifts real smooth, no issues at all. So I think as long as I'm careful with it, it should be fine and give me plenty of years of service. Looking at the carriage of the lathe, it travels nice and smooth, but doesn't have a lot of play to it or backlash in the screw adjustments here, so that was good. Another feature that I was really happy to see, these handles and cranks, they're all made out of that Zamic material, and it's pretty common on these Atlas lathes to find these with broken handles or missing handles, and these are kind of expensive to replace if you price them on eBay, trying to find used ones to replace. So I'm really glad to see that those were all intact. Another area of potential damage on any lathe really is this corner here in the compound rest. It often will get damaged by someone accidentally running the lathe all the way into the chuck, and the chuck will strike this corner and take out a big chunk, but this one's good. So again, just kind of goes to show that whoever owned this lathe knew what they were doing and took good care of it. So continuing our look at the lathe, the bed is in great condition also. No big nicks or dings or any damage to it. There is a little bit of very light rust just starting to form. You can tell it looks like this carriage has probably been sitting in this spot for a long time. so it's nice and shiny underneath there, but then there's a little bit of rust right starting to form there. That'll clean off easily enough though, so that's no concern. Lead screws in good shape. Again, maybe a little bit of wear down here towards the end of the headstock where it gets moved back and forth a lot, but it's all in all, it's fairly tight, so not an issue there. I did not check the half nuts yet, but you can buy those still from Atlas, and they're only $20. So you might see them on eBay, people selling them for 50, 60 bucks. Don't buy them from them. Go to Closing Atlas, and you can buy them direct from the source for a lot less. The tailstock, again, is in great shape. It's got the hand wheel and the lock still intact, not broken off like a lot of them. And this one even has the original dauber, which these are almost always missing. And this one actually still has some white lead in there, which is a toxic substance. And if you believe some of the stuff you read on the internet, I should be dead now just for touching that. But I'll clear that gunk out and probably just leave it empty, but nice to have the dauber in there. This lathe also came with this kind of cool chuck. It fits in the tailstock ram, but this is actually a headstock chuck. And this center, if I can get it out there, that comes out and it's threaded on the inside so that you can screw it directly onto the headstock and use it like a drill chuck right on the headstock. These are kind of hard to find, so that was a neat little bonus. When you buy a used lathe like this, there's always going to be something that's not to your liking. And in this case, one of the things that seemed odd to me, somebody must have at some point tried to clean it and degrease it, and it looks like they sprayed it down with some really kind of nasty caustic degreaser, and it looks like it melted the paint off in some places. And so they probably sprayed it and just left it, forgot about it. But that kind of ruined the paint on this lathe. And, the paint job is pretty much just for appearances, so it doesn't really affect the use of the lathe. But that's something that, I don't know, I'll have to see if I can live with that or not. If not, then a repaint job will be in its future. I kind of hate to do that just because it's a big task, but for right now I'm just going to leave it the way it is. This lathe also did not come with the original Atlas motor. That's just a little GE motor on there. It works fine, but I might see if I can find an original motor to replace that. One of the best parts of buying a used lathe is to look through all the goodies that usually come with it in the way of tooling and accessories. And as I mentioned, a lot of the tooling for this lathe I think probably walked off. It was probably stored in a cabinet or drawer somewhere and just got dumped out or sold. So there wasn't anything in the way of tool holders or cutters or anything like that, but there were a few accessories that somebody had set aside. So I thought I'd kind of go through just the other stuff that I got with the lathe. Starting with this, this is the 4-jaw chuck that was actually mounted on the headstock when I bought the lathe. It's a Cushman chuck and it's in great shape. Looks like it hardly been used at all. So that was a nice little bonus. And I did find the chuck key that goes with this as well, so I've got that somewhere else here. There were a couple of these old metal film canisters that were sitting on the bottom shelf of the lathe stand. When I opened the first one up, I found all the change gears, I was glad to see that. I probably wouldn't have bought the lathe if it didn't come with these, because these often get separated from the lathe and it's kind of expensive to buy a whole set of them. So you need these if you're going to do any kind of threading. You use different combinations to get different pitch threads. So glad to have those. And they look great too. Again, the condition looks like they've hardly been used. This other canister full of mostly Morse number 2 dead centers. There's the adapter socket that goes into the headstock. A lot of these look like they might be shop made tooling, which is fine. End mill holders, drill chuck, another one that actually looks like it goes into a brace and bit with that square shank there. Oh, this was a nice find. This is a carriage stop. It was an accessory that Atlas offered. You don't see them too often, but they do come up every once in a while. It clamps onto the bed, and then you can adjust it with this micrometer, so that if you're facing a shoulder, you're cutting to a shoulder, you can set this stop and then run your carriage up till it hits that, and that way you can make repeat cuts all at the same shoulder depth. Some good stuff there. There was another large metal canister that came with the lathe that had a bunch of stuff in it, and as I was going through that, I came across the follow rest. Interestingly enough, there wasn't a steady rest for this lathe. At least there was not one included in the stuff that I had, but this doesn't look like it's been used much, and to be honest, I don't know how much I'll use it either, but I'll set it aside and keep it with the lathe. In that same canister as the follow rest, I found all these parts that I think everything's here for the Atlas taper attachment, which is a kind of a rare attachment. You see them come up for sale every once in a while, but this clamps onto the bed of the lathe and the cross slide, and it allows you to turn tapers. So I've used one only once before. They're a little finicky to set up, but once you get them dialed in, they actually do a pretty nice job. So I'm going to have to go through one of the manuals and see if all the parts are here, but I'm hoping everything's there, and then I can get this up and running. So this lathe did come with a milling attachment, which is kind of a nice perk. If you don't have a mill, this is a way to do some light milling on your lathe. They're not designed to do heavy-duty milling projects, but I've seen people that have done quite a bit with them, so they tend to be in fairly high demand. So I was kind of glad to see that this one came with that. I might try this out just to see how it works, but since I have a mill, I probably won't use this one too much. A few more bits and pieces here. This is a spindle nose protector. It threads onto the end of the spindle just so that you don't accidentally cut the threads when you're working close to the spindle of the headstock. That looks like it was shop made, but works fine. And a boring bar holder. Again, this looks like it might have been shop made, but that fits onto the compound rest and allows you to hold boring bars of different diameters. Not sure what this is. It looks like some kind of a shop made ball turning or radius turning tool. I don't know if it's complete or if all the parts are there, but not sure what I'll do with that, but see if I can find out any more information on it. And then just some various wrenches. That's the key for that headstock chuck I showed you. Miscellaneous wrenches that just happened to be lying around. This actually is the Atlas wrench. This is the one that Atlas sold that fits the lantern tool post, and then the wrench fits various. I think this is for the tailstock nut, fits that. So nice to have that just because it fits everything that's on the lathe. I grabbed all this stuff. It was sitting in the cupboard next to the lathe just because, why not? It's probably going to get thrown out or left behind if I didn't take it. So just some little cans of oil, small little oilers. Don't know that I'll really use those, but this one's still full. It's probably got spindle oil in it. Case in it, surface hardening compound. Never used this stuff. I don't know much about it. This was kind of interesting. I grabbed just because it says glue on it, and what they are is hide glue flakes, and those keep indefinitely if they're sealed up. So a couple jars of those. Play with those. And then last but not least, I got this gallon jug of cutting fluid, Keystone cutting fluid. So that's probably a lifetime supply for me. But that was sitting in the back of the cupboard, and I thought, what the heck, I might as well grab that too. So that's a look at my new Atlas 10F lathe. My plan is to clean this up, get it oiled, and check the wiring and belts on it, get it back into working condition, and hopefully you'll see it in a future video. Thanks for watching.